Welcome! This is Gary Sullivan, Chief of R&D and creator of IOP Technology. This video reports on research into the management structure of the K-12 school system. The school system has a hierarchical structure. Teachers report to principals, who report to superintendents, who report to school boards. Now there is more to schools than structure, but structure is of central importance. Any improvement initiative of any kind, from any source, will be affected by this management structure as it moves from inception to implementation. In other words, structure affects everything. An elected school board sits at the top of the hierarchy. It provides resources, both people and funding, and sits in judgment of performance. Now, an analysis of the school boards is beyond the reach of this study. However, some characteristics can be inferred from the kinds of people that they hire. And superintendents are probably the most important. They guide the policy, procedures, and practice for a school district. Our study samples 37 superintendents from 11 different states. It is not a big sample, but it is large and diverse enough to be statistically meaningful. This is a picture of those superintendents' information processing profiles. It is a bit odd. This curve is usually smooth for people who share the same role. This is worth a deeper look. This table matches the superintendent's profile with management in other organizations. R-squared, or the coefficient of determination, measures how well the superintendent's overall profile fits these other management functions. 100% would be a perfect match. The superintendent's profile is unique. It does not seem to closely resemble any of the other functions. It turns out that professors come the closest, but even here the overall resemblance is weak at 51%. While the profile is unique, the job isn't. A CEO is a common comparison point. Both roles, CEO and superintendent, set policy, make strategic decisions, and monitor performance. But the match with CEOs of for-profit firms is among the weakest at 16%. And the match with nonprofit CEOs is not much better at 24%. Let's look at the pieces that make up the superintendent's overall profile to help isolate the differences. Most other functions rank higher than superintendents in their use of the decisive, action-oriented RS strategy. In other words, almost all other functions, regardless of their level, are more inclined to take quick action on an issue than are superintendents. The superintendents, on the other hand, tend to dominate these other functions in the use of the well-planned, methodical, and safe LP strategy. So, what does this tell us? Well, it says that superintendents can and do act, sometimes vigorously, but those actions will be safer and less venturesome than those seen at almost all levels in other types of organizations. Let's use centroids to contrast superintendents with their often cited counterparts, the CEOs. The yellow dot is the centroid. It is a Cartesian average that distills all four information processing axes to a single point. It represents the best single bet on a person's likely decision behavior. The centroids for individual CEOs are on the left graphic. The superintendents are on the right. Each dot is an individual person. So, let's count the dots and do a little division. Both CEOs and superintendents favor new ideas, but CEOs favor them a lot more. And when actually doing something, superintendents are much more likely to use well-proven methods. CEOs, on the other hand, are much more inclined to take decisive action on their new and untested ideas. Superintendents, on the other hand, prefer to evaluate thoroughly, plan carefully, and execute methodically. So, what does this mean? Well, the data says that superintendents will appear to be a vigorous, forward-looking lot offering a wealth of new ideas. But they are likely to lag in actually doing things with those ideas. As a group, superintendents are not likely to be the drivers of reform. But that is not the end of the story. There are other levels of management to consider. and principals are the next level. Our sample includes 208 principals from 12 different states. And the overall profile of these principals seems to match up pretty well with the middle management of other organizations, including over 5,000 managers and directors from corporations, nonprofits, and government agencies. There are differences, but the overall pattern appears to be roughly the same. So, how do principals compare to their boss, the superintendent? Well, here's the picture. The principals are in blue and the superintendents in red. There is virtually no difference in their action preferences. Both favor the risk-averse methodical LP strategy, and both avoid the highly responsive and somewhat risky RS options. But there is a big difference in their thought-based strategies. The principals are focused on analyzing options. Superintendents concentrate on generating those options. So, what does this gap mean? Well, adjacent organizational levels must be able to at least see the perspective of their adjoining level. If the gap gets too great, people begin to talk past each other. If there is no gap, people just mirror each other's existing views rather than enhancing them. Let's start by looking at the gaps in corporations. This graphic shows the difference in average scores between 947 VPs and 5,313 managers and directors. The gap in their information processing styles ranges between 5 and 10%, with an overall gap of about 7.8%. Each level lends perspective to the other without getting out of range. Now let's see what schools look like. This chart shows the difference in the average scores between superintendents and principals. The overall difference with corporations is not great, 10.4% for schools versus 7.8% for corporations. But look at what happens when we take the average apart. There is practically no difference in the action-oriented styles of the decisive RS or the methodical LP. Principals and superintendents are just reflecting, not enhancing, each other's view in this action-oriented dimension. But there is a bunch of difference in the part that decides just what action is to be done, the thought-based HA and RI strategies. The 18% gap in the idea-generating RI strategy is big. Superintendents are likely to be a fountain of ideas for the system. Principals are focused on assessing, evaluating, and planning. The 20% gap here means that each of the superintendent's ideas will probably be seen as requiring study. The likely outcome of this relationship is an idea analysis cycle. Ideas breed analysis. The resulting analytical insights give rise to more ideas, which then require even more analysis. Since neither principals nor superintendents have an inclination toward decisive action, the process just grinds on until ideas and analysis are exhausted. Then it is time to actually do something. Here the school's strong LP style kicks in. An extensive planning and specification process begins. This is a formula for spending a lot of time and money, and that formula will be applied even to things that are not worth the investment. Most of the time, the things that are being planned and specified will actually be done by the teachers. Teachers are the delivery mechanism of the school system. Our study includes 218 teachers from 11 states with a token representation from Canada. And here is how the teacher's overall profile matches those of people at different levels in other organizations. Two things stand out. The teacher's allegiance to the safe, methodical LP style is among the highest around. And their commitment to the idea-oriented RI style is among the lowest. Teachers' profiles most resemble nurses and hourly manufacturing workers. Now keep in mind, this just measures the way that information processing is done. It does not consider the amount or kind of knowledge that is being processed. For example, had we included just surgeons instead of all MDs, their profiles would closely align with those of the teachers. Surgeons use the same careful, deliberate, and cautious LP approach. Would you want any different? So, now that we know how teachers fit in, let's put the entire hierarchy together. Once again, we'll start with corporations as our reference point. This chart shows the strength of each of the 4 IOP styles from corporate CEO to non-management levels. Notice the stair step. There's a reason that this exists. But for present purposes, it is enough to note that there are differences between the adjacent levels, but they are relatively modest. Now here is the same picture for the school system. The stair step is gone in everything but the idea-oriented RI style. Let's put the 2 hierarchies, corporate and school, together to see just how different they are. This graphic lays out the corporate and school hierarchies side by side. Corporations are on the left, schools are on the right. Superintendents have almost 30% less responsive RS inclination than do CEOs. In fact, the RS inclination for all school system levels, from superintendent to teacher, fall below the lowest non-management level in corporations. The possibility of decisively resolving an issue will probably not even be considered at any level in the school system. It is exactly the opposite condition for the process-oriented LP style. Here, the superintendent is 40% more likely than CEOs to depend on this cautious, methodical strategy. And the other levels in the school system share this high LP commitment. Nobody is likely to argue that the methodical approach is being overkilled for any particular issue. So, what does this all say? Well, the RS and LP styles represent different ways of getting things done. The RS strategy produces a good enough solution, and for many things, good enough is good enough. The strategy is fast and inexpensive. It is ideal for issues where perfection costs more than it's worth. The LP strategy is focused on producing safe, positive, and certain results. The best way of getting this result is to use methods that have worked in the past. This approach makes a lot of sense where the negative consequences of failure are high, or the gain promised by new methods is low. Schools heavily favor the careful LP approach. It makes sense if you're building a new school building. It makes less sense if you're deciding what donuts to get for tomorrow morning's meeting. It's unlikely that any level of school management will make the distinction between donuts and school buildings. Rather, everything is likely to be seen as requiring a disciplined, exacting approach. This is a bias built into the system, and that's not all. There's still the thinking part. The 2 strategies yet to be considered involve thinking rather than action. The HA strategy focuses on planning, assessment, and evaluation. Delving into all aspects of an issue. This can take a lot of time and can become complex even for the simplest of subjects. Principals and teachers share a high HA commitment. This level is higher than everyone except non-management on the corporate side. Principals and teachers are likely to agree that any decision, regardless of how trivial, is worthy of careful thought. And the wide gap with the superintendent is unlikely to provide any relief. The plethora of observations, objections, and comments of the more numerous principals and teachers will probably overwhelm any restraints attempted by the superintendent. On the corporate side, these gaps are narrow and more balanced. For corporations, analytical overkill restraint is built in. So, what does this tell us about schools? Well, the HA component will spend time and money in evaluation, assessment, and planning. And the LP component will take this detailed work and specify it to point-by-point operating particulars. The combination of HA thinking and LP action make almost everything an expensive and time-consuming investment. A heavy commitment of time and money is built into the system. This applies whether or not the issue merits the expense. But what about those new ideas? Well, they're going to be there. Schools roughly approximate corporations in this dimension. It is what is being done with these ideas that is the issue. By definition, new ideas will involve change. Those committed to these new ideas are likely to try to force this change by pushing it through the system. And it ain't gonna work. The natural response of the system will be for everyone to work harder using as many established methods as they can. Everyone will really try hard. There will be no lack of sincerity. When an initiative fails, a circular firing squad will form. Everyone tried real hard, so failure must be someone else's fault. In reality, it's no one's fault, and everyone's fault. It is the fault of the system. And the only permanent fix is a structural change in that system. The prime objective of that change might be creating the stair-step information relationships seen in other organizations. This new structure will help ensure the viability of any change initiative, regardless of its source or its target. An increase in the decisive RS style will heighten the sense of urgency, open up more adventuresome options, and create a willingness to adopt a more experimental approach to change. The LP-based reliance on traditional methods might be de-emphasized in favor of a more flexible, less well-defined approach. The cost of change will fall. And the HA's analytical stair-step can be leveled a bit. Analysis will be more restrained, take less time, and be more focused. And not everyone has to change. You just need to shift enough people at each level to cause the overall population profile to bend a bit. Natural group dynamics will do the rest. The net result of the structural change will be a school system better able to adjust to changing needs. With a stair-step structure, any needed adjustments will be more frequent, but will be smaller, quicker, and less stressful. Everyone will benefit. Thank you for viewing this video. If you would like to learn more about IOP technology, please visit our websites at iop.com or oeinstitute.org. Both sites have much more information on IOP and the area where it has or can be applied. Thank you again for your interest in IOP technology.